Join me behind the scenes as I introduce you to my friends, the people who make your favorite films and TV shows, the people who make the sounds of Hollywood. Hi, I'm Micha Lieberman, your host. Welcome to the Sounds of Hollywood. I've been working in music and sound in Hollywood since 1995. So it's a long time. It's 27 years. And, anybody who's been doing anything for a long time looks back over their life and thinks about those moments that sort of pushed you towards your eventual life path. And you don't realize it at the time. It's just something that happened, but it keeps coming up in your mind as like a motivator. And for me, one of those real turning points that I didn't realize at the time was going to be a turning point in my life. I was like 13 or 14 years old. I'm at summer camp and we're doing a color war. And my team had made a cheer. And one of the kids on my color war team was like a piano player, a really good piano player. And we wanted him to play piano for our cheer. So he and I walk over to the piano, and I had literally just begun to study music, like to take music theory classes and begin to like explore music as something you could try to understand. So he and I walk over to the piano so that we can figure out the chords for this cheer so he can play it. And when I say we can figure it out, it was like I watched him figure it out. And at one point when he's doing it, he played a chord in an inversion. I don't want to get too technical about what that means, but he played a chord in a certain way that at that point in my life would never have occurred to me to do. And I was astonished that he made that choice. And I wanted to know how he decided that. So I asked him, I was like, hey, why did you play that chord in an inversion? And for a second, I could see that he didn't even realize that he had done it. And he thought about it and he was like, oh, I guess it just sounded better that way. And that answer did not satisfy me at all because he hadn't heard it before he played it. So what did he mean it sounded better that way? Like somehow he was hearing it in his head before he was playing it. He was like doing something that didn't make any sense to me. And I was sitting there thinking like, this kid has like magic musical powers. And how is he doing this? And it really like lit a fire under me to try to understand it and be able to not do what he did, but even just understand what he was thinking. And that moment of my childhood pops into my head all the time when I'm presented with something that's like musically challenging for me to understand. And I am sitting here with that kid, Gabriel Mann, singer, songwriter, composer. And it turns out I was right. He does have magical musical powers. And all these years later, who would have thought that I would be working so many years, so many shows, so much of my Hollywood history would be tied up with my friend from summer camp, my childhood friend, Gabriel Mann.
Have you told me that story?
I don't know.
That's a great story.
Thank you. And I think it's really special. You obviously are a very special guest here because we didn't meet doing this job.
Yeah.
We
go way back.
Way back. And I started in 1995, like I said, as an assistant composer, my first Hollywood job for a composer named David Schwartz, who is responsible for some of the greatest television shows in the history of Hollywood, from Northern Exposure to The Good Place and a bunch of other brilliant shows in the middle. And he saw something in me when I was a young kid, and he hired me to be his assistant. And I was an assistant composer there. And I literally had my first job, and I had a pager just to time it. And my pager goes off with some LA number, and I call it back, and it's you. And I'm like, what are you doing in LA? And you were getting your degree at USC.
Yeah.
What was that? Like a degree?
They had like an advanced, it's now a master's, and apparently there was a period of time where you could go back and like trade in your advanced studies degree for a master's. Apparently they didn't like get in touch, and I like missed the window. So I still have an advanced studies degree in film music composition. I had graduated from college. I had a degree in music composition, whatever. Turns out none of that matters. Unless, I mean, it matters to me. like I think it was helpful for me, but no one cares. It's not like you apply. It's not like you put it on your application to be like composer.
Oh yeah, right. I have a degree in advanced
Yeah.
degree in film composition.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
so-
Well, then here's all the jobs.
right. No, you were struggling to get jobs in the beginning. I remember you were all of a sudden you were studying to be a film composer, and I had this job as an assistant composer for this film composer.
You had like the job that I needed.
You had
Like,
I
or
had the
like
job.
I
you
felt
needed.
like I needed. But it took me forever to get there. I mean, do you remember what I did before that?
Yeah, you were like making cables,
I worked for Electricia,
right?
like right near here in like 100+ degree heat, smoking Marlboro Reds all day long and listening to Black Sabbath
With
in
a soldering iron in your hand.
with a soldering iron in her sweatshop. And it was actually really fun.
Sounds fun.
but I was terrible at it, and apparently she still has examples of my work on her wall as like what you're not, how to
Do not do.
make a cable. I was not particularly good at making cables. I mean, the main way I earned money at the beginning was by arranging a cappella songs for every group, and because that was where I had success in college. And I didn't sort of realize that you could translate that into money, but it turned out you could. And so I did a lot of that.
You did a lot of, like we all did, sort of odd musical jobs. Well,
Yeah.
and at night, because David Schwartz had this incredible studio, you and me and Rich Ragsdale would go in there and record songs.
Yeah, for the Electric Sausage
Nightmare Band. And that was really just like you and Rich going crazy.
That could have been a huge band.
It could have been a huge band.
Could have been huge. It was sort of like a Nine Inch Nails-y, but like a little, I don't know.
A little more
How do you
tongue-in-cheek,
describe
maybe.
it? A little more tongue-in-cheek version of Nine Inch Nails,
Yeah.
if that is even possible.
So
But-
we're like in our 20s and doing this, and I have this insane idea that I'm gonna go work for this record label, and I leave my job as David Schwartz's assistant,
Yeah.
and you take it.
Yeah, that was the best deal. I did have a couple other jobs as an assistant. My first like assistant composer job, I worked for Beekman's World, which was a Nickelodeon show, and my job was to drive my early 90s Honda Accord. It must have been an 80s Honda Accord that when I bought it, it had 150,000 miles on it. This was like what my parents left me with. A used Honda Accord and tuition to USC.
And they're like,
and then that was basically
they're like,
it.
go make a career.
They're like, good luck. And because they didn't, not because they were terrible parents, they just didn't know. I didn't know anyone here. They didn't know anyone here. It was, and it's not like when you grow up in Texas, anyone teaches you that like entertainment is a business that is viable in any way. So if you're a parent from Texas, like you're like, well, I don't know.
Right.
Good luck. And anyway, my job was literally to drive from Topanga Canyon to Hollywood, bring a large hard drive that probably cost like $3,000 to, and it was like, 100 megabytes.
Right.
To Hollywood, deliver the music and spot the show. And like, I was like, I didn't know, like, I felt like that was a pretty huge responsibility. Like he just didn't want to drive there.
And spotting the show means like sitting with the producers and the director and watching the show and deciding where the music's going to go and what music's going to go where and why.
Right. So in a show like this, there's a ton of music.
Right.
And so we would just go through it, and it took like a couple hours. And then I would take the notes back in my handwritten scrawl back to this guy. And that was basically my job. It was like one day a week I would like do this drive back and forth. It took basically all day. And then I would return with the hard drive. That was my first job. Then in Topanga Canyon, which is this sort of, mountainous area where all the Australians live. He was not Australian, but there's a post office, and I go, and we're at the post office, me and this composer. And another composer comes in. All the tons of composers live in Topanga Canyon.
Right. It's like a lot of rich hippies up there.
Yeah. So Russ Landau comes in, and we meet, and like then I wind up working for him. because I didn't need the other guy didn't really need me that much, and Russ wanted somebody more full time. So then I'm working in like a space that's about this big for Russ Landau for a year,
like a tiny
maybe a little over
closet.
a year. Yeah, and I learned how to use a sampler. He had like the Akai S2000s. You'd get like stacks of them, and they would each have like a sound.
Right.
Like if you wanted a good sound, it would take up the entire sampler. So I learned how to use that. I started using Logic, which I just hated, and I always rebelled against it, and I still rebel against it. I hate Logic, and I can't use it. But this was before Logic was owned by Apple. It was extremely complicated. It was like the most.
Yeah, I remember. That's like music writing software that was like very, very complicated.
It made like the title of the software is like such a misnomer.
Because
it's so
very
insane.
illogical.
It's
yeah.
totally illogical. Anyway, I worked for him for a while on a bunch of shows. I didn't really write much music. I was just sort of like there. I don't even know what I was doing. Like, he was working on real shows, like a CBS show and like a Fox show. And there was a particular executive producer that he worked for all the time. And then you called and you were like, hey, you should come to this studio. Cause like, I think you were like on your way out.
Right. I was like,
and
I'm leaving.
You didn't want to leave David in the lurch. And so,
and you took the job as David's assistant. An assistant composer, just for people who don't understand, they're the unsung heroes of Hollywood.
Yeah.
Like
there's many jobs that are like this that are not just for composers.
Oh, I agree.
Like the assistant whatever is always the unsung hero.
An assistant composer has to have skills at a very high level as an audio engineer, as a composer, as a secretary, as a musician. Often when you're mixing stuff, you're performing, you're doing every job in the composer's life at a very high level in a non-union, low-paying, no credit, no glory.
Yeah, but when I
job.
walked into that studio, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like this guy is real. He cares about what stuff sounds like. This studio is like legendary. We have a huge picture window of the Pacific Ocean. This is like it. I was like, I couldn't believe it.
You know, what's funny about David Schwartz, on top of being, a brilliant musician, is if you look at the talent that he's discovered around Hollywood, the number of people, music editors, composers that come out of his studio, because, Jason Reiterband, who's another music editor, and I were talking about it, who also was David's assistant at some point. He taught us what's important, like how to focus on what matters, like the quality of your product matters. Like he doesn't get involved in all the Hollywood politics and all that. He just writes great music and hires great musicians.
He does it because he loves music. Like he's always loved music. And like there are people that come at the job of writing music from a little bit more of like a commerce standpoint. And David has like a very unique voice, and that's like really hard to come by. So like musically speaking. So like that's like his currency. And,
so speaking
and he'll always have that.
Of unique musical voices. So here comes you. You're now David Schwartz's assistant, and you start doing this show, Arrested Development.
Oh yeah.
And David's the composer, and you're his assistant, and you start co-composing with him.
Yes. I mean, a bunch of stuff happened in there before that, which was that like I had done, which we don't have to get into.
No, please.
Well, I had done many years of writing video game scores with Becky, with Rebecca Newell, who's another composer, who's like another part of the landscape of my life in Los Angeles. But yeah, at some point, you're skipping, like I had a quote unquote solo career as an artist that happened basically between 1999 where I only worked for David for a year as his assistant.
Right.
The last thing I did for him was score a pilot by myself. It was a disaster.
Okay.
He went to Hawaii and left me to score this pilot. And the producers were extremely difficult. It was like I can't get into too much detail for fear of incriminating many different people. But basically it was a nightmare. And I was like, I hate this. This is the worst job. I'm never doing this again. I'm out of here. I'm going to go do my songs and I'm going to be Coldplay and it's going to be great. And I basically used the rest of that summer. I flew out my old engineer from my a cappella days at Penn, and he mixed my solo record, which I had been sort of recording off hours at David's studio. And that was my first record. This is like 1999 now. So
Okay.
4 years after I came to LA. And so then I started playing a bunch of shows and doing all that stuff. And Chris and Becky, who I was in another singing group with, Spiral Mouth, which is like a semi-pro a cappella. I mean, this is like way too much detail probably than we care to get into. But basically, Becky and I started doing a bunch of music for video games at some point because the a cappella group had gotten the score to a video game. And that was really cool. And then they gave us another game that was not an a cappella game. And then suddenly we spent about 7 years and I was doing a lot of video game music with Becky and playing a bunch of shows and making more records. So I made like 5 records over that time. And we did all these video game scores. And I was doing a million other things at the studio with Chris and Becky's studio that I worked in for 22 years. And it gradually evolved into like a place where we were writing music. But basically, I went on a tour. I had to do all that.
All that.
After leaving David, for him to then call me at the end of this tour where I was opening for Alanis in Europe, which sounds extremely glamorous, and it was not. But it was great. I came back.
She was like one of the top acts in the world at the time.
Yeah, but I came back from that tour and I thought the world was going to open up at that moment and there would be the ticker tape parade and like everyone would like, I would be like on the shoulders of, slaves holding elephants. I'd be riding an elephant down Hollywood Boulevard. And people would be singing my praises, but that didn't happen. What did happen?
That could still happen.
What did happen is that David Schwartz called. He's like, "Hey, I just was listening to your record. This is my second record, which had come out like 5 years prior to this phone call, and there's some good songs on there. Do you want to write songs for this show?" Now we're at your question.
Now we're at my question about this. What made me say it was the word unique voice, because that's exactly what happened. You have this voice. And the funny thing is, there are like multiple reasons I could have had you on this show. I could have had you on as a studio singer to talk about that. I could have had you on as a guy who gets his songs placed in TV shows to talk about that, or have you on as a film composer to talk about that, because there are so many ways that you have used your musical gift to influence the sounds that people hear in TV and film. And it is a lot of it, like you said, comes from your gift as a singer and a songwriter. And that has really led into your composing career, which has diverged very far from that. Like, you're not just writing songs for TV shows anymore, but you're still writing songs for TV shows.
Yeah. I feel like that's the big win in all of this, is that like somehow whatever I did before, which was like, I was always sort of keeping feet in both worlds. I wanted to be a composer. Like I came out here to be a composer, not to be like a singer-songwriter. But I became really disillusioned with it early on, because it just, either because the projects I was involved with I didn't feel like great projects, or because I just felt like my role, like I was like, I couldn't visualize how you would get from being like an assistant to being like in the chair as the person with the gig. That was another part of it. And also I was writing songs because like, I was like a young whippersnapper who felt like I had a lot of like emotional things that I had to say. And so I did that because it felt very natural. And I had started doing it in college. I had really started in high school, and I wrote songs about like space and like just like, it was just awful. And I wish I had recordings of those things, but like, it was like before I would even had any method of recording anything. Anyway, I think because I was doing songs at the beginning and I was sort of involved with score in some way, it just was I'm still doing the same thing I was doing then. I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm making songs, I make score, I get to sing a bunch. It's like the same.
And when you say I get to sing a bunch, like just your career as a studio singer is fascinating. You sang on the Oscars.
Yes.
With Adele.
I mean, I learned very early on that a union singing gig is like gold, because I had done, I don't even know if you know this. One of my first union singing gigs was and the union is like SAG-AFTRA. It's the actors union. The powers that be in Hollywood decided early on that singers are actors. Yes, that a singing voice is as valuable to as an actor, and somehow they threw in their lot with the actors. Anyway, whatever. So I sang on a Marines commercial.
Oh,
that was one of my first things. And it was on the air for like 3 years, and it paid for my healthcare for 3 years. And like we were like, Allison and I were just like getting together, and she was like, it was like mind blowing that you could, first of all, it paid well, and it just kept coming. Like the residual checks would keep coming, because every time it aired on ESPN, the Marines commercial, it's like that. You've probably seen it 1,000 times. It's the guy climbing the mountain and the music's like, dun, 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 dun. It's like very classic film score-y, and there's a choir at the end.
Right.
Then at some point they replaced the choir with a sample, and that was that. But
they didn't want to keep paying you.
Yeah. And in that context, like not having a real choir didn't kill the commercial. It was like probably fine.
But you've sung on movies.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. So my point about all that is just that when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, I need obviously more singing gigs. This is the best thing ever. And so I tried to like do as much of that as I could. And it was it's also really fun. You just walk in and it's somebody else's job to figure everything out. It's their gig. You're just in there putting your voice on it. And it's like, it's super fun.
Any of that, like, what are your favorite studio singing gigs?
I mean, for a while I was singing on all the big like movie choirs. Like I sang on like Polar Express, and I sang on like, I don't even know. I sang on, one of the best ones was the Lorax. On the Lorax, which is John Powell. First of all, I didn't really know who he was, but I like walked into the room and I was like, oh, now I know who this person is. He's like mega talented, really fun composer. He did like Happy Feet. He's like, yeah, I mean, if you look up John Powell, he's done everything.
Yeah,
he's at
very,
the top.
very important Hollywood
super, yeah. And he had a big team, and it was exciting. I went to his house and we like do this. This was early in the Lorax. So he's literally writing the songs. He's a song guy and a score guy. And so he's writing the songs and he plays guitar, and it was basically me and 3 other singers or so maybe. And we would just inhabit these characters. He'd be like, now be this guy, and now be that guy, and now be this guy. And doing demos of the songs early on. And some of those things stayed in the soundtrack, and then I got to sing in the choir. It was just like the greatest gig ever. And we kept going back. It wasn't like one time. It was like we would go like every week for a few months. We would go in there.
One of the composers that I was an assistant for after David Schwartz, after I decided I was going to go be in the record world, and then I was like, no, this is terrible. I'm going back to film and TV. John Frizzell, we were doing this film Office Space. And we were asked, Mike Judge says, what's the musical equivalent of like wearing a Hawaiian shirt? Because that's what I want him to feel like after he, goes into the spell and doesn't care about it. What's the musical equivalent of that? And John Frizzell's like, oh, like maybe a Hawaiian men's choir, And so I'm like, oh, let's call Gabe.
Because I was down the street. I was literally down the street.
You were down the street. Right. So you come over, and I don't know if a lot of people realize that the entire Hawaiian men's choir, that is like one of the fundamental features of the music of Office Space, is you.
Yeah.
You're every voice in that choir.
My friends, I had some friends of mine just watched that recently, and they had gotten to the credits and it said Gabe Ruttman, featured vocalist Gabe Ruttman.
Right.
They were like, "Is that you?" Because it sounded like you. That was another great gig. Those gigs are like gold.
That was so fun. You came over to John's place, and you and I just like sat in his studio and just recorded a bunch of tracks over and over.
Record again.
Hit record again.
Hit record again. Let me put another one on there.
Yeah, it was.
And just stack it up. It was super fun.
It was super fun. That was and what's funny is that you having this like singer persona, like having this other incredible skill on top of your music writing ability, was the hook that got you into film, into eventually being able to write films and TV scores, because David made that phone call and said, "Come write these songs for this TV show that is going to have these little songs as transitions." And you sang those songs too, right?
I mean, that was the best gig. That might have been it was a kind of a turning point for me, because first of all, we were having a baby, a first baby. This is 2005, so it was the first baby. We were having Piper. And I had just finished this tour, and Allison was supposed to give birth like 2 weeks after the tour. And so I get back, and then somewhere right in that area, David called with this thing where like he was like, "Just come in and we're going to write something for this new show that I'm working on." And so I was like, "Great." But at that point, my mindset really was focused on like playing shows as a solo artist. It had nothing to do with score, but this was like a way to sort of like, it was a way to get paid. Okay. I needed money. Like I was always able to make a living somehow, cobbling together all these random things. And I think that's part of why it is definitely why I did all those things, because I was just trying to pay rent. Like we're all like, there's no path. So you're just trying to pay. Anyway, whatever. So,
no, it's a good point, because, a lot of people, okay, I want to be a neurosurgeon. So here's the path. I go to medical school, and then I get a residency, and then I get an internship. Even before that, it starts. I'm going to major in pre-med. There's a path. Yeah. And if you stick to the path and you do a good job, and then you get it. You get to be a neurosurgeon. But people are like, I was in the post office and I bumped into Russ Landau, or like, I literally met a guy who told me he was in Starbucks and he was in a stall, and the dude in the stall next to him ran out of toilet paper. And
it's like Quincy Jones.
He asked like, "Hey, do you have any toilet paper in that stall?" And he shared it, and it started a conversation, and he ended up scoring that dude's short film. And that guy went on to make a feature-length film, which he ended up scoring too. They met in the bathroom of Starbucks. That? I'm not going to tell you. But
save it for another episode.
Yeah, exactly. They met in a bathroom of Starbucks, and that is what got his career going. And it is, there is no path. And that is,
that's the thing that I think any person who works in music, who's like a professional musician of any kind, virtually, they all have a different story of how they got to where they got to and why they're doing what they happen to be doing.
And David just has this idea, hey, it would be cool if we use songs as the transition.
Well, David and I really got along. And like, I didn't leave him because like we didn't get along. Like I had a hard time personally being under someone, which I never really sort of realized was like a trait of mine, but like apparently it is. I had been working for other people for a while. And
you honestly never realized that was a trait of yours?
Well, I didn't.
I think I've known that about you forever.
I didn't. I feel like I'm like a pretty good collaborator. Like I'm good being equal with people, but I don't like to work for someone, apparently. So anyway, but David and I got along well.
Just as a side note in my own personal philosophies, there's two kinds of people who fall into the category of not making great underlings. One is people who don't know how to do what needs to get done and therefore are frustrating to their bosses, and the other is people who have natural leadership skills. And so I think
and
you fall into the second category.
You know that about me from my days as as the AVP of TOL Young Judea.
That's right, as the administrative vice president of our youth group. When you were in what?
Not that I knew at all what I was doing, but I did like standing in front of everybody and telling them where to go next.
Right.
Anyway, so David called and he's like, let's come over, let's write these songs. And we write like a song for Arrested Development. And I got to play on it and sing on it and write it with him. So that's like a 3-way, just like speaking purely in terms of commerce, it's a 3-way income. You're getting the musicians union fee as a player, you're getting a SAG fee as a singer, and then whatever David wants to pay me as a co-writer. And then there's back end because we split the public performance royalty. So like, this is like mind blowing at this point. And I had been working in music for many years at this point. It's 2005. And I had been here for 10 years trying to figure it out. And like suddenly when that happened, I was like, oh, this is good. And it wasn't like full time. I would go in every couple weeks and they'd need another song for a thing. And sometimes I would sing on it. Sometimes Lucy, David's daughter, would sing on it. It was just the best time. Mitch would like leave, Mitch Hurwitz, who's the creator of Arrested Development, would leave messages on David's, like, you know, analog voicemail machine.
Right. His answering machine.
And he'd like sing some insane thing that we would then turn into a song. I mean, it was just like the greatest time.
And that launched what turned out to be maybe one of the most prolific television composing careers in Hollywood. You have done more shows.
Oh, you're talking about me?
I'm talking about you. How all of a sudden you said, oh, maybe this is where I belong. And sure enough, Hollywood with open arms has, I mean, have you ever counted? I didn't count.
I have not counted because I feel like it's hard to count because some of the things that I have worked on, I don't really show up anyway, but no, I don't know if I've counted.
A lot, dozens and dozens of television shows. And I have been fortunate. We have, I think it's pretty clear at this point in the story that we have been involved in giving each other jobs back and forth for a very long time. And that has led to, I wrote a list down of all of the TV shows where you were the composer and I was the music editor.
That's crazy.
Are you ready?
Yes.
It's an insane list. Are you ready? The Protector.
Classic.
I
had to skip Winter Vacation for that one. Because that was one of my first dramas.
That was an hour summer show, an hour drama, like a procedural crime drama. And that show, the crew, that was like the most fun. It was just constant laughing.
Well, but at the mix, but I was never at the mix.
Oh, you were never there. Yeah, you were just locked up in your room scoring the show.
Yeah.
I'm going to list even the pilots we've done that never made it to air, just because the number of projects is baffling. Okay. So you ready? So The Protector, Prairie Dogs.
I loved that show.
Midnight Sun.
That was like Beastie Boys.
Yeah. Midnight Sun.
Loved that. Midnight Sun, another great show.
Trophy Wife, sitcom. Twisted, another drama. Welcome to the Family. Marry Me. Angel from Hell. Rectify. Rosewood. Higher Ground. Hannah Royce. The A Million Little Things pilot. 9JKL. Fam. Carol's Second Act. And we just last season did Pivoting.
That's crazy.
It's a very long list of TV shows that you and I have done together.
That's just the ones we've done together.
Yeah, that's just the ones we've done together.
You've done a million other shows.
And so have you.
I've done a million other shows.
Yeah. It's hard to untangle how involved we have been in each other's careers throughout the years.
Well, it was like, okay, wait. So first of all,
yeah.
I should just say that working for David on Arrested Development,
right,
then became. I didn't go right into doing my own thing. It took like
you did
many years.
You did a few shows that didn't quite take off.
I did 3 more shows with David,
right,
in a much more sort of like composery role.
And then Modern Family.
Yes. So the last one of those shows that I did with they was Carpoolers. Did you work on that?
No.
Another prior assistant of David's is a music editor, Jason Newman. So
right.
It's either him or you, or Jason Reiterman, who's another prior assistant of David's,
or Erica.
Exactly.
I'm telling you, he's a lot of Hollywood. His
That's
assistants
so
all
crazy.
go on to have great careers.
Anyway, so that the third show of those was the show Carpoolers. That was another short-lived show. But one of the directors of that was doing a pilot, and I still like hadn't figured out how the whole thing works. Allison is my wife. Allison was like, she reads the trades obsessively just because like she's interested in it. And she's like, don't you know that guy? That was the director of one of these episodes of Carpoolers, who I happened to hit it off with, was directing a pilot. She's like, don't you know that guy, Jason Weiner? And I was like, oh yeah, he's that director from Carpoolers. And she's like, why don't you ask him if you can like do music for his pilot? And I was like, okay, good idea. And like that kind of stuff didn't occur to me.
A lot of it comes down to just having the balls to ask.
Yeah. But it's not even that I didn't have the balls. It literally didn't occur to me that you would ask someone to write music for their project, which is so crazy. It's just like, I guess I wasn't like there yet. Like while I was working for David, I was like, God, I just need like to get my own show. But I didn't put together that meant you had to offer your services to someone to do their
right.
show. Anyway, whatever. So I got in touch with him, and he's like, oh yeah, you should come to the set. And I met the creators, and they were like very sort of like weren't really interested in music, and or at least weren't ready to talk about it. And they were like, okay, great. But Jason, the director, was like, don't worry about it. Here's what we're gonna need: this and this and this and this. And one of the things they needed was like a theme. He was like, this is gonna have like a traditional sort of like theme song, not a song, but a main title sequence,
an iconic sound.
Yeah, exactly. They needed like some kind of thing. And it was his idea, like what it sounds like. But he was like, I want like a big band shout chorus kind of thing. And which is essentially the part of a big band piece where the music it's like the break.
Right.
It's like where the tune kind of goes away and the band is just like yelling. And the groove is going.
And the yelling on that main title, that's you also singing.
Yes.
Correct?
So I had learned my lesson from Arrested Development. So I played on it and I sang on it, which, I mean, if you can call yelling singing, and I wrote it. But it was his concept. And so I made that. And then that really was sort of like how I went from working for someone, with someone as a musician, to sort of having my own.
Oh, so there is a path. All you have to do is write an iconic television theme.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you get a career.
Well, it also has to be on a hit show.
On a hit show, right? Write an iconic television theme on a hit show. Oh, all right. Let me just write that down.
Right. It's like insane. It's insane. It's insane.
And that crazy. Led to, really, that was the moment.
That was the moment where at the same time.
This is like the fifth moment where we're like, that was the moment.
Well, that was a big pivoting moment. But the other thing that was happening at the same time was that the rescues were starting, and the rescues became sort of my song world. I was like done being a solo artist. Every time I would play, it was like hard, and I just never like I liked it, and I felt like I was pretty good at it, and I liked my songs, and people liked my songs, and like, you know, at least 10 people liked my songs. And,
at least.
But it wasn't like, you know, it just never blew up. I mean, the biggest thing I did was that big opening tour, and that was really fun, but it never like blew up. And then the rescues happened. The rescues is 4 singer-songwriters, or it started as 3, then it became 4, and now it's 3 again. And the Rescues there was like a spark there that had never really existed in my solo project, where like there was industry attention and like audience attention. Like the audience grew very quickly. This is like around during Arrested Development and before Modern Family. And then by the time Modern Family started, the Rescues were making our sort of first record. And while Modern Family was going, we wrote this whole new record and started playing it at show after show, like adding the new songs that we had written like that week. And then we like got a fancy manager and we got a record deal and like all this happening. And we were on tour while the first season of Modern Family is going, my first like solo credit as a composer.
And Modern Family, was it like an instant hit?
Instant hit.
So
like within like 4 episodes.
So this year all of a sudden you go from struggling singer-songwriter, struggling television composer, assistant, in 1 year, you've got a hit TV show. You've got a band that's taken off.
Yeah.
I remember at some point you called me, you were like, we're the #1 song on Apple Music today. Or, like you're all of a sudden things are happening.
And we had a second baby.
Like,
I mean, and we were on the road. It was like impossible. It was an impossible year. Like, I don't know. I don't even know how we made it. You know what I mean? Like I was literally writing cues from a gas station on the road with the band, like writing cues for a different product. I like got my headphones on and I'm in the back of the
and you
bus.
I remember there's like that little mini back keyboard that fit in your backpack.
I had all these like devices. Like now you can do everything. I could have done it a lot easier now, but I had like these custom like flight cases built for my hard drives. And
right now you could just bring a laptop.
Yeah. Now. Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
Yeah, that
was a crazy year. That was 2009. So like between 2005 and 2009, I was doing those other shows with David.
And 2009, this career starts as a film. Oh, and I should say, so 2 things happened really. 2 careers are really launched there. Either of which could have gotten you in that white chair right there. The first is this long list of television and film that you did. And just from that list of shows that we've done together, you can see it's comedies, it's dramas, it's sitcoms. And also, you and the Rescues start getting your songs placed all over the place in other TV shows, in Grey's Anatomy and other,
Yeah. One of our biggest ones was we wrote a Christmas song while we were on the road during that time. And it played over, like, not every film, TV song placement is created equal. Like some of them some of them can result in a lot more attention than others. Like you can be playing on the background in a bar and no one can even tell that it's there.
Right.
Or you can be on the season finale of Grey's Anatomy. At the end of the episode, everyone's dying.
You're the montage.
The sound goes down. The song comes up. There's no dialogue. Season's over. So like that's a magical placement. And those are like, and that's like what you want. You got to have those like major placements because like otherwise you get money and that's nice, but you don't get
the audience doesn't really get a chance to hear your music.
Yeah, exactly.
In that
that's
situation.
Right. Yeah,
and ultimately in the end, for most artists, it's about getting your work in the ears of other people because there's an audience out there for everyone. It's just finding them.
Yeah. But the Rescue, okay, so the Rescue story is basically like that year, we did a ton of touring and the year after, and we had this fancy record deal. And basically we all, we were like kind of old to be a band already. We were like in our mid 30s, or I was in my mid 30s. They were a little bit younger. And we all just sort of like went for it. The label was like, we want to put this song on the radio. And essentially the understanding was like, if it doesn't go, this is kind of like it.
Right.
We're not going to like send you on the road for like 10 years. We didn't want to do that. We just wanted to like either make it or not really and go back to our lives basically.
Right.
I certainly felt that way because I had this other thing that was happening. And I didn't want to, I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to like keep feeding what I felt like was a really viable career. The Rescues and music, like songs and shows and all that is so risky. I knew it was risky. I always knew it was risky.
But you've managed,
but I love to do it.
And you've managed to keep to find some sort of symbiosis between where they feed each other. And you know, when Hollywood needs a composer who can do both, they're calling you a lot. High School the Musical.
Well, I have a new show that's really interesting that sort of fits that. Well, okay, High School Musical is a good example because that show, first of all, I don't do all the songs in that show, but I do some of them. And I also have like they know that they can like sort of rely on me for song related activities.
Right. We get a composer and we get a songwriter in one, and writer producer all in one.
There's also
package.
like an aesthetic concept to the way that people that come from songs write score. You know, you can say that the score that I write feels kind of songy.
Sometimes. When it needs to.
When it needs to. I mean, one thing that I think I have learned about myself is that I can like write a tune, and not every composer is a tunesmith. A lot of composers make unbelievable soundscapes,
right?
And or you know what I mean, like the guys who did do you know these guys who did The Outsider, which was a Jason Bateman production? They also did Ozark. I don't know their names. They're very complicated names, but they're like, I don't know if I would think of them as tunesmiths. I think of them more as like, they make the most amazing sounding scores, and they're all like using found instruments, and they're just like creating these incredible
like soundscapes.
Yeah. And like, I like to do that too. And that's fun. But like, but probably what people would describe as my sort of like zone and my strength is like, I can write a tune.
And what was the new project you were about to mention?
Oh, okay. So there's a new project that I'm doing with Ingrid Michaelson. She's a singer-songwriter who many people listening probably know. It's a very unusual thing for me because basically like she's a singer-songwriter. I'm a singer-songwriter, and that's fine. But I also have this background in making score. She doesn't really do that. But the sound of her voice is critical and her melodies are critical. So I'm sort of like helping. It's a full-on co-score basically. So like we're taking like her germs of ideas and turning them into the score basically.
Do you like collaborating like that, or do you like just being left alone to write?
I mean, it's fascinating. Like I've never really done it before in this way, and it's super fun. And there's another guy involved, Juan Ariza, who's essentially acts as her producer, but is also very creative, and makes really cool sounds. So it's sort of like a 3-way collaboration. It's really fun and very interesting.
That sounds awesome.
And I don't have to. I'm not being the thing. One of the things.
What's the name of this project?
It's called Tiny Beautiful Things. I only do shows that have lots of words in the title now, and they have the word things in them.
No, we just did Pivoting.
Yes, that's a good one. That's a single.
I saved you with the one word. It is interesting for me to have you be pulled out of your normal writing style, writing practice.
Yeah.
Because process maybe is a better word. Because one of the things that I get to do as a music editor is sit behind a lot of composers and watch a lot of different writing processes. And you have a very unique process. For most people, there is this working it out, editing process. For you, it's like you conceive of an entire complete piece of music done in your head. And then it's just like the time it takes to get each instrument out of your fingers into the computer, and then you're done.
That is, I think, mostly true. There are times when it's like I actually feel like in Rectify, which I think you and I agree is like one of the greatest things we've ever been involved in.
For sure.
As a piece of art. Like that
the music
show,
you wrote for Rectify is, some of the most, beautiful music. For those of you who are into film scores in Hollywood, I highly suggest you go listen to that score.
Well, that show was like, I felt like that was really difficult. It's like sometimes it would be exactly as you're describing. And I do feel that way a lot of the time, depending on what I'm working on, that like I can just sort of like at this point, and it wasn't always this way, but at this point I can basically see it. Like I can watch it down or I can read it on a page and be like, okay, here's what I would do. But with Rectify, it's like Ray McKinnon, who's the creator of that show, he would always like, it's like it was always opposite
right
of what I was initially imagining. And I think that's why it came out so great, because I had this person here who was like
challenging you.
Yeah, he was really pushing me to make something different. And like every time I'd be like, I just feel like we don't need it there. Like it's too long. And he'd be like, no, this is going to be an 8-minute thing of a guy whacking pieces of wood. And it can never feel like we've heard it before. Like it can never repeat itself, like that kind of thing. Or, the other thing that was so wonderful about that project is there were these vast open canvases. So you could really like take your time. Like you could open a piece of music with like a 30-second, just like letting one note expand and bloom into the biggest and most wonderful version of itself, and then start the melody. And the melody could be like 4 notes and it would be so massive. I don't know. It was just, he was always like, I just felt like he was always demanding something special and wonderful. And there's a lot of variety in terms of like the kinds of sounds we were making, even though like it all sort of like makes sense together in the end, I think. Anyway.
Both Matt and Laurie brought up Rectify. It was definitely one of those jobs that touched everybody who worked on it.
Yeah, it was just like, I mean, I would just like to get another one, and I don't know if there will ever be another one.
Yeah, there's those special ones.
Yeah, it's very special.
But it's not from lack of trying. You've gotten dozens of them since.
Yeah. Well, they're all, and I like doing them all. That's the other thing. Like if you look at that list, just the list of the things that we've worked on, there's like a pretty big variety of like stuff.
Dramas, sitcoms, multicam sitcoms, single cam sitcoms, which is like, the 2 kinds of sitcoms, the ones that are with a laugh track in front of a studio audience and the ones that are shot more like a drama. You do them all.
And I really find value and pleasure in all of them, like in all the different kinds of things you can do. I mean, it's partially like it's the same way in which I like to sing on, and the way that like, the Rescues will have like an up song and a down song. Like that's like part of like human existence, is like all of those different things. Like I like to write a 4-minute piece of music that like is a thing in and of itself. And how do you make that thing the best? That's like sort of a math problem. And then I also like to write an 8-minute, thing of some guy like whacking a piano with a hammer.
Variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, I love all that stuff. It's funny to look at that list. I feel like really, like I don't know where all the time went. I also feel really lucky that like I got to do all that, and I look forward to whatever's next.
Yeah, I think we're all feel really lucky that you did all that, because your contributions to Hollywood and the sounds of Hollywood have really been important. Yeah. So thank you.
Did I tell you I'm writing a musical with the Rescues?
Oh no, you did not tell me that.
That's another thing that's going on.
You're like for stage or for
like a stage musical theater production. I don't know if I can I can't really announce what it is yet, because like I don't think anyone's like announced it yet. I can tell you when we turn off the things what it is.
Ooh, a little tease. We'll have you back to push that musical when it comes out.
It's pretty exciting. It's pretty major.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to The Sounds of Hollywood, and we'll see you next time. It was such a pleasure introducing you to one of my close friends. Can't wait for you to come back. Click the subscribe button, follow us on social media, and we'll see you next time at The Sounds of Hollywood.